Hello and welcome to Nerdy for Nerds by Nerds. I'm the Rick Stevens. Today I'm joined by TC Satek. Sotek?
Yep.
How do you say that?
Sonic?
Satek.
Sonic, yeah.
Totally butchered it. Should have asked beforehand.
It's all good. It's such a common pronunciation of my name that I should probably just switch over.
Yeah, I have a last name that's kind of like that too. It's Friant, but we always get Frint.
Well, yeah, thanks for having me on. Excited to chat.
Thanks for coming on. So, if you just want to kind of introduce yourself and let people know what it is that you do, give them the elevator pitch.
Yeah, I guess it's weird to call myself this because I've been doing it for only 4 years now, but I'm an RPG designer. I created Quest, take fantasy tabletop role playing game, and started that in 2017. We did a Kickstarter in 2018, which was successful, and we're now a few years later. Just came out with some expansions with characters and treasures, and we're amping up to do a sci-fi themed edition next year. So I've got a lot of work ahead of me, but it's been a great ride getting to do this.
Well, I mean, the moment you publish a game, you're technically a game designer. It doesn't necessarily mean you're a good one, but you're definitely a game designer. But with the success of Quest, I think we can say you're doing pretty good.
Yeah, it was a weird moment. I mean, I'd been on the criticism side for many years in media and journalism, criticizing game designers, and then I was like, oh shoot,
I know the
I have
shoes
a
on the
game
other
out there
foot.
now. Yeah,
Yeah. Was Quest your first Kickstarter?
it was. Yeah, learned a lot. Learned a lot of lessons. It's tough. There's a lot of. I think actually when I got into Kickstarter, 2018, it's already kind of a mature platform at that point, and there's a whole kind of industry that's popped up around it of people who do third-party services. So I think it was probably a lot harder to do a Kickstarter early on when there was no, fulfillment companies that were going to help you out, no kind of support services. But now there's a lot of partners you can bring on board to make things easy. Nonetheless, I learned a lot of lessons about international fulfillment and logistics and all of that. But it's been as much as it was a challenge creating the game and designing rules and caring about all of that stuff. It was even more of a challenge to figure out how to get something manufactured and how do you deal with vendors and get things freight forwarded between locations. It's kind of the boring side, but I found it fascinating. I've learned a lot. So it's been really interesting being able to start with fun stuff and then move into, okay, this is how you run a publishing company.
Yeah, boring, but like when there's a breakdown in any of those instances, it's instantly felt, and it's no longer boring anymore as you try and scramble to figure these problems out.
Yeah.
So yeah, we ran our first Kickstarter in 2019, and I think it's just like anything. The first time you do something, you're probably going to make a lot of mistakes, and just try figure it out and do better next time.
Yeah, for sure. So the big thing I'm trying to figure out this year is we're expanding internationally. So my fulfillment partner has opened up a bunch of warehouses in EU, UK, Canada. So
and the laws just got more complicated in some of those places.
I wasn't anticipating when Brexit was happening that it was going to affect my life personally, but here we are.
Yeah.
So.
Well, RPGs are very international, and yeah, I know there are some people that they don't even want to deal with international for that reason. But yeah.
Yeah, also, you can kind of cheat. You can kind of cheat and hack and get away with, if you're a really small business, no one's going to ding you for selling stuff internationally. But if you're going to do it for real, you have to set up, business entities in those regions and deal with that and become an importer of record. This could go on, but it's part of my learning experience this year.
Part of your life now. So we talked about this a little bit before we went live, but if you'd like to share with everyone, how you got started with Quest and what was kind of the impetus for creating Quest.
Yeah, for sure. I'd be happy to. I love talking about this because I think, especially in, you know, I've come to learn that in tabletop design communities, this raises some eyebrows. But I haven't been playing tabletop games for relatively long. I'd always been kind of a video game RPG player. You know, I played a bunch of EverQuest. I was arguably addicted to that at the height of EverQuest addiction when people were writing about, you know, divorces happening in the Washington Post because of EverQuest. So I've already always been kind of part of some intense RPG communities. But I only got into tabletop role playing around the time fifth edition Dungeons and Dragons came out. My company happened to get a preview of that game. My friend Dieter dumped the books on my desk, and I just kind of like ravenously consumed the player's guide in one night. And I moved to the DM's guide, and immediately I just, you know, I also looked through some of their example adventures, and I was like, I don't want to do this. I want to create my own world and create my own situations and characters. So I started on a really intense world building project. And discovered that I really, you know, what I liked about D&D was getting to make stuff. You know, I was making, I made a bunch of handmade maps and ordered wax sealing stamps on Etsy. And it's like I was going the whole 9 yards to create an experience for my players at the table. And that was the really rewarding part of it for me, was getting to see people have fun with stuff that I was making. That ambition kind of was too much, and I had two groups with 10 players, and unfortunately they failed because I just couldn't keep that many people together. So I started listening to a lot of real play shows, podcasts, and you know, so my commute every day, I was listening to just hundreds of hours of this stuff for years. And eventually I had my own idea for a show, but realized I didn't really think D&D was the right vehicle for it. So I just kind of opened a Google Doc one, like at around midnight in 2017, and wrote the first draft of Quest. And 4 years later, here we are. So the idea for the game started as kind of in the wake of me listening to a bunch of real play shows and kind of wanting to capture some of the magic that I felt from how people were running those games, how people were hacking the systems that they were using, inventing their own rules, and trying to create like a really particular experience at the table.
It's really interesting to see how technology is kind of like starting to affect the game and change how we play it. And you know, here we have a system that was basically inspired by, you know, the way, you know, the game's being used for technology and entertainment. And you know, we were talking before, and like when I've worked with different companies and they're putting out a new RPG, I'm like, you should definitely do a streamer rules light version of any game you put out. You know, if you want to have streamers use it and kind of market it that way. Obviously, Quest, you don't really need that because it's already pretty streamlined.
Yeah. Yeah, that's one of the, you know, I tried to early on. Actually, you know, it would be hilarious if anybody saw the first a few cuts of this game, because it was way more, it was 10 times crunchier than it is. It ended up being, I had rules for armor systems, and there were levels in the game. I think I
Yeah.
started with 10 levels. There were something like 400 spells and abilities, and it kind of had that MMO feel where, and this is present in other games too, where you kind of get incrementally more powerful versions of the same thing. And I eventually got down, you know, my editor helped me get to a place where it's like really, you know, there were a few concepts that I started with that were really strong. I think one of them was the relative system for distance, where you have, you know, there's only 4 classifications for distance in Quest. And they're all, they describe things narratively the way you would just talk about them in the game. So in reach means you can kind of hit things from where you stand. Nearby means if you have you're close enough that turn or to deal with something. In range means, you know, it might be further than you can run to it in that turn, but you can still maybe use an ability to deal with it. And then too far, like literally just too far for you to do
Yeah,
do
yeah.
anything this turn. And that was one of the concepts I think early on that just was kind of from a place of confidence where I was looking at a lot of other games, and also just from my experience listening to stuff. Like, how many times did I hear people have the conversation of, oh, is this what's my speed per turn? Is this 30 feet away or 60 feet away, or can I, and they're doing like hardcore, spending a couple minutes working out the relative tactical positioning. It just doesn't make good radio. And that's also like, that was never, when I was playing D&D, that was kind of dragging down the game, and people forgot by the time they figured that kind of stuff out, what their abilities even did, and what they were doing in the first place in that scene. So eventually I kind of, really leaned into, I think with confidence, what I was trying to achieve with the relative systems, and simplifying a lot of stuff. And I came up with, from there, I kind of took a breath and started over and wrote down some principles for design that I tried to have reverberate throughout the game. And one of those things is, don't duplicate stuff. So we don't have those MMO progressions where you get like Fireball 1 and Fireball 2 and Fireball 3. It's just, no, this is your Fireball spell. You can internally crank it up if you want to, but you don't have to like learn it 5 times. I tried to kind of like distill to the essence of the types of things people would want to do in the story, so they could focus on the outcomes of that stuff rather than, all the crunch around it.
It is one of the easiest advancement systems that I've played. It's like, did you finish a session? Yes. Take a new ability.
Yeah.
If we're doing it right, that's how we do it.
Yeah. I think, part of how that works just came from stuff that I loved about MMOs.
Yeah.
That is an area where I got inspiration from MMOs. I loved, and EverQuest, and then I think World of Warcraft actually has it. You have, these branching trees of abilities, specializations you can go into. And I was kind of like, it's just fun to specialize your character and to go down paths. And one of the things I was, looking at when I designed, I had levels originally, and I was trying to like, it's a weird reflex to want to space things out and kind of like control how much fun people are having along the way. You're like kind of metering it out. And I was kind of like, what if someone just wanted to choose all 6 abilities or all 5 abilities in the path on session 1? Would that be possible? And I think my answer was like, yes, why not? And I kind of designed around that, to make some of these abilities scale internally instead of scaling in the sense that, oh, you have to play 20 sessions before you can become this powerful or use this ability.
Yeah, and for people that aren't familiar with Quest, is so you have special abilities that you get, but within a particular special ability, there might be multiple uses for that ability, and they have a cost in your action points. You have a set amount of action points, right? Like, right. you might want to do the big thing, but you may only be able to do that for today, and that's it. I don't think.
Yeah, you do have to accumulate some power over time to use some of the biggest expressions, but I at least I wanted to give people access to the stuff, and instead of waiting until you had to play a game for 2 years to get to use your goodies.
I don't actually know. Do the action points go up over time? Do you ever gain more?
I think that's really that's one of the things I left open-ended, because it really depends on the pace of play that you want for your particular group.
Yeah.
So I started with I kind of asked myself, what's the minimum amount you need per session to have fun? And I think I arrived at 5 or 6 for that. So you just get that between sessions as a reward for playing. And my cat is trying to disrupt this call here. And then on top of that, it's kind of like a milestone reward system where it's kind of the discretion of the guide to dole out points if you make it through a dungeon or usurp a corrupted mayor, whatever the situation is. If you role play well or you accomplish your goals, you should be getting bonus on top of that. So ideally, it's a situation where you balance the line between arbitrary, I'm just giving you points so that you can do things because you're out of points, and you're actually doing meaningful stuff and getting rewards in the game.
So I think the way we do it is we do 10 health, 10 AP, and then like our sessions are 2 hours. So after the first hour, you get back 2 AP if you've spent it. And then when we start a new session, as long as we didn't stop like in the middle of something, like we just refresh the AP. And like I said, we're all kind of like learning as we play it on stream, and it is like we call it the spiritual successor to a D&D campaign that Doug had run before. That was kind of loosely Spelljammer D&D, and Quest has worked out really nice for kind of like re-envisioning it, and really just focusing more on the story and less on the mechanics.
That's great. What's your favorite ability so far for your character?
Well, I just got what is it? The hand of something as a spy.
The death hand.
Yeah, the death hand, where I just can blow something up. It's kind of fun. I mean, but I've like found ways to use like all the abilities because I'm playing a GIF, and they're like, I don't know if you're familiar with like any of the Spelljammer stuff. But they're these hippopotamus people that are all like they look like colonial mercenaries is basically what they are, and are very militaristic. So I went with spy because I'm like, well, he's trained as a commando, but he deserted it because he doesn't really want to do that stuff anymore. And so I like the versatility of that. And also he uses like black powder weapons and old-timey grenades, I call them. They're basically just like the round bombs with a fuse.
Yeah, that fits that role pretty well.
Yeah,
stylistically.
So Brian wants to know: is there quest content for linked one shots, or campaign content seems to build for short, fast games and one shots? Well, we are playing a campaign, and there are rules for kind of like upgrading your character.
Yeah, it was tricky to try to find the balance of, is this a game that's really good for one shots, or can you play long-term campaigns with it? And I tried to strike a balance between making players powerful up front if they want to be, but then also having enough over time to unpack if you want to go long. And that's why I think each role has between 25 and 30 abilities, and then there's legendary abilities that you can only get if the guide decides to award them to you, or you come up in a circumstance that you can get them. So it is designed for, if you want to do a one shot, cool. If you want to do a short arc, great. But if you want to do a long-term campaign, it's definitely possible. And then in terms of the actual, adventure content that we have, our approach so far has been to largely be hands off in terms of the actual world of Quest. So there's no canonical setting for Quest. We're trying to create characters and treasures and situations that are really flexible that you can use in your own story. So that's what we did in February with our Treasures and Characters expansion. We came out with a book with 101 characters in it, but they all have kind of interlinking story prompts and context that you can use to kind of quickly create your own. There's a lot of implied adventure content. So we'll expand on that eventually with some official one shots and probably campaigns that are related to those characters and treasures that come out of that stuff. But for the most part, it's a DIY world building situation.
So how has the development of like the Quest community been?
It's been I've also been kind of hands off there. I think we have a great group of folks in Discord who chat a lot about their characters, the kind of campaign prompts they're doing. I think someone actually started a play by text server in Discord. With a ton of breakout rooms where people have found groups and play long-term games over Discord, which is neat. And then there's plenty of folks who are doing their own homebrew stuff and selling it on itch.io. I think so, someone from the community made an app called Quest Companion, which I think you mentioned you're using.
Yeah.
And so it's growing, but I think there's a lot of people seeing the opportunity to make stuff around the game. And we also have a Creative Commons license for some of the core stuff of the game that lets people build on top of it pretty easily without needing our involvement at all. So we're trying to build something that people can take and make their own without needing permission from us. People seem to be doing that. Actually, the thing I'm most excited about, I think, is our educators who are talking in our Discord about how they're using it with their classes. We give the digital edition of the game away free to educators, counselors, after school program runners anywhere in the world. So I hear from folks all the time about how they're using it with their kids, students, and I think that long term is going to be a really important space for Quest.
I like the fact that Quest has like a gradient as far as success and failure. I like games that operate that way, where you have Quest has a critical fail, a fail, success with tough choices, success, and then critical success. I like those components.
Yeah, that's another thing where I kind of just took something that I thought was fun and replicated it just because I thought it was fun, which is the critical success and fail. Like when in my time playing D&D and listening to people play D&D, those moments where you roll a 1 or a 20, really some of the most emotional moments at the table. People get excited, and it seems like it always felt like it was the right amount of probability so that those moments came up frequently enough to be special, but not too frequent that they get boring when you see it. So I wanted to preserve that, either end of that. But then I also, I think there's the problem of having too much failure in a game, because coming up with consequences is tough. Like it's not easy. I don't, at least personally, I don't think it's easy to come up with interesting failures.
Yeah.
And you see this a lot in like very combat heavy games where it's like you're just in slugfests and you get to a point where it's like, you roll under and it's like, well, shoot, I failed. I don't hit the person next. Nothing really interesting happens in the story. So I really weighted the die towards success. So that means that, even though it's kind of described as a beginner friendly game, it actually is pretty deadly if you do a lot of combat, because your enemies have just as good of a chance at hitting you than you hitting them. But I really wanted to emphasize that, do what you want to do, keep the story moving forward. And then in the rarer case where you fail, ideally it's not happening so often so that you have a chance to think of a more interesting consequence for failure.
It's also nice too when you have those static mechanics where like they don't change, they're always the same. So how to interpret them, where like in D&D it's like, well, does this pass the saving throw? Is that, does it beat this armor class? So there's always that variable to figure out, where in this it's like, nope, you rolled what you rolled, and no matter what it is, it's gonna have that effect.
Yeah, it's tough it's interesting. I think, in terms of people leaving their religion, it's in terms of the thing that's kind of hardest for them to accept. Yeah. I think specifically moving from D&D to Quest is, well, how do you determine if someone's good at something, right? Or why is the fighter have just as much chance to hit as the wizard? And I have to, the best way I can describe it is that the die roll in Quest is not a measure of skill; it's a measure of fate. So fate is tilted toward success, and then the measure of skill is the particular abilities that your character has. So the fighter does have a lot more tools for dealing with close hand encounters than the wizard does or other classes do. And then I think there's a softer concept of skill in the game, which is your cumulative skill as a player, your meta skill in terms of knowing which abilities to use, how to work with your friends, so that
Was
over time in the game, like your stats are not increasing, but the enemy's stats are increasing probably, and you have to use your stuff more effectively. More, you have to consider more carefully how you're approaching dangerous situations.
what was your thoughts behind not having stats?
That was one of the things that I did not like about MMOs. So I know I've been talking a lot about various inspirations and cherry picking things. I really don't like stat inflation. And I don't remember what the best example of this is, but there's some, in MMOs, especially when they go on for 15, 20 years and those expansions get up there, you're looking at numbers on the screen that are like in the millions or billions of damage. And it's like,
Yeah.
that doesn't make any sense. It's incomprehensible. You can't really, it loses context. And I think the whole point of having the stats, ought to be giving you a sense of how powerful you are, or how well equipped you are to deal with the situation. And I think in something like D&D, you have the challenge ratings, which can be helpful, but they're a little, there's still there's a lot of translation to do in your head there. But when you're talking about, if you want to just drill down on hit points, like you get to a point in the game where you kind of lose context about how powerful am I? How powerful is this enemy? Because stuff just keeps increasing, and you kind of lose that grounding. So I wanted to have something that grounds you, and what 10 hit points is a quest. That's the most you ever get. You never gain more or less. And I think having that having that kind of control lets you really judge no matter where you are in the game, whether you're into one shot up front or whether you're playing a year from now. If something's hitting you for 5 or 6, that's immediately that's a big problem for you. And you don't have to think about all the inflation that's happened over time and try to recontextualize the stats in the context of the story.
Because there are not many RPGs that completely lack stats. Like they almost have their version of them. I mean, some of the one page RPGs don't, but anything with a more complex rule set almost always does.
There's another side of that. Originally Quest did have stats. I mean, I had wisdom, intelligence, all that classic stuff. And when I thought more about it, there was one particular thing that I always thought about, which was if you're rolling random stats, for example, where you're taking the default spread or whatever, you're forced to make. And again, you don't have to abide by the numbers, but I think if you're breaking the rules so often that they don't matter, then you shouldn't have the rules. But the context that I kept coming up in my head was, I want to be a really strong fighter, and that's probably going to mean that my intelligence is low, and I'm kind of forced now to play a certain type of character that maybe I don't want to play. And right. I think role playing someone who's strong and brave or intelligent or whatever should really be a choice that has nothing to do with stats. And I understand the value of having those stats when it comes to trying to resolve a situation of skill. But those stats are also supposed to inform how you role play that character outside of the skill. And I don't like tying role play to whatever a number on
mechanics.
The sheet. I think and that comes up in Quest too, in terms of the only way that the die works as a measure of fate and not of skill is just making choices about what to even call for a die roll for. So you can play, the strong fighter if you want to. And, if you're in a situation where you have your party in a room and they're like, I want to break down this door, I think, the best way to resolve that would be the guy just saying to the player who role plays the strongest, hey, do you want to give this a shot, and give that player the chance to roll the die, instead of working out, okay, what is everybody's ability score, and figuring out, I think it could just kind of move quickly to a common sense determination of who's best equipped to do this based on who their character is and how they've been playing.
That totally came up Sunday. We're playing a game of D&D. and we're like, all right, we need to investigate. What is your modifier? 0, 0, -1, +1. Okay, you're the investigator.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. And I do like it. The idea that your character is more defined by the special abilities they have and how you choose to portray them than a pile of numbers. And also like you have these abilities, but also like it's so easy for you to determine how your individual character implements them. Based on whether they are a big, strong, tough person and they do it by brute force, or they're a quick and agile warrior that uses skill and finesse. And it's just a matter of how you describe it.
Yeah. Yeah. I try to, a big thing I try to do in a lot of the abilities in the game is add performative stuff to the table or really specific flavor, so that when you do have those opportunities to shine using your role and the abilities, that it stands out. So the fighter has a few abilities where they can read poetry at the table or give a rousing speech, like an Independence Day, the president
Yeah.
rallying everybody. There's moments in each role for that player to really stand out. But then I was thinking that for the rest of the time, it sucks. It's just not fun to have a character who can't do things in certain situations. Like if you're the level 1 wizard and you want to do a one shot, you have a couple spells and that's it. Outside of that, you're not, you might not be that useful in a lot of situations. And I wanted to have everybody feel kind of like there's a baseline of anybody feeling like they can contribute to any scene meaningfully. And then on top of that, you have ways that you can distinguish yourself and shine and go the extra mile. But I didn't want anybody, it can be in some cases fun if you intentionally want to role play a character who's weak or bumbling or whatever. But I wanted the average experience for folks to feel like you can really do stuff in a scene and feel empowered to participate.
What is the most unique way you've seen someone use your game system in?
I think someone in our community in the Discord used Quest to basically play Pokemon. They turned it into a Pokemon RPG, which I think was great. I was surprised how well it worked, but not surprised that someone tried to do it. I think because I've intentionally, a big part of the design of the game was making the core rules a scaffolding that you can really do anything with, which is why the sci-fi edition that we're making is going to be completely compatible with the fantasy edition. Like you'll be able to mix and match the roles. They'll be able to exist in the same stories if you want them to. So I really tried to make something that people could just take and say, well, I could make an ability tree very easily for a different type of role, or I can the basic rules for hit points and death and how to use adventure points and all of that stuff. It really does not care what setting you're in or how you're using it. So the Pokemon RPG is great. I've had people say Quest is a very anime system. It's easy to imagine anime fights happening because everything's kind of some things are really over the top. So I would say, the Pokemon RPG is an example of, and then I think someone else, a counselor in Germany reached out to me and said, I think this was the first time someone mentioned this to me, but they said, oh yeah, I'm using this in therapy with my clients and it's helping them overcome some of their anxieties, which I know is not unique to Quest at all. It's been done. People have been using D&D and other games for that kind of thing. But it was still, it still made me feel good to hear that.
Well, I mean, also, sometimes it doesn't really make sense to use D&D in those situations. Like there are games I think that would work better, only because if the goal is therapy and you're using an RPG to kind of facilitate that, something with simple, less complex rules, I think would help get the game out of the way of the thing that you're trying to do, more so because like 5e D&D is rules light for D&D, but it's not rules light.
Yeah, I mean it's a tactical combat simulator, really. Like
Yeah.
with Dimension Door and some other cool stuff. So it's, but yeah, but that was great, and just more generally, I have people sending me photos of kids in their classrooms playing it, and I don't care how they're using it. It's one of those things where it's like they could be, you know, using it to, taking two abilities out of the book and having a kid say, what they're doing in a scene and not actually playing through a session or whatever. That's fine. Like the fact that people are using it to meet their needs or to, help people have fun in any kind of circumstances is great. And I don't, doesn't matter to me whether they're all sitting down doing the traditional, you know, six people around a table rolling dice and telling a long-term story type of situation.
So you said you're working on a science fiction version now. You guys will be kickstarting. Um, so is that going to be all new roles? Is it going to be like reflavoring roles from a more fantasy version to a science fiction version?
Yeah, so it's going to be all new roles. I think we're going to have, we had 8 roles in the fantasy edition. I think we're going to have 7 roles in we're calling it the cosmic fantasy edition, but sci-fi.
Yeah.
But it's a little more like, it's a little more Marvel MCU than, hard sci-fi or anything. There's, space, there's space magic still. And the fact that it's backward compatible, has to do with that. So we're going to have 7 new roles. And then I think we're going to have 1 generalized, which we haven't had before, general ability paths where anybody can choose from them, and have some overlap there. There's going to be some, functionally, there's going to be, healer, tank, that kind of thing needs to still functionally exist, because it will be something where you can play the sci-fi edition independently. You don't have to even have ever known about the fantasy edition. It's going to take all the core rules of the game will be the same. So the way hit points and distances and combat and adventure points and all that stuff works is going to be identical, which means you will be able to, for example, show up to the sci-fi edition table with your classic fantasy book in hand and say, I want to play an invoker on this starship. And that would be a completely reasonable and seamless thing to do.
Honestly, the way it's written now, I don't think it's very hard to do. Just some mild reflavoring, and you can make it kind of whatever you want. The system's very flexible like that.
Yeah, I try not to. I think one thing that I kind of had in the back of my mind, and this is actually based on some of the world building I did early on in D&D. I've always loved this idea of a setting where the world is on the brink of a lot of social change brought about by technology, which is kind of, in my day job at The Verge for the past 10 years, I've covered the intersection of technology and culture and watched the world change due to that. And you can have, technology change brought about by technology can take any flavor, and I think magic technology in the classic fantasy edition is really implied in the treasure catalog. There's certain things that, you can, there's a kind of like a chat roulette magic mirror in the treasure catalog. If you look hard enough, you can see some of these parallels. But it's also not so specific to a time or place that you go into quest being like, well, all right, I'm in a medieval village. Like you could be really in any setting, past, present, or future, with the way the game is written, I think, which is intentional because I knew early on I was going to expand it into other themes and scenarios, and I wanted them to all mesh together such that people felt like they could continue their stories in outer space or mix and match and really make something that blends fantasy and sci-fi.
So after science fiction, post-apocalyptic, steampunk.
I don't know. I have so much work on my plate now. It's hard to try not to get in my head of myself there. but I would love to at some point, look at licensing. I think another opportunity for Quest is I think it's going to be pretty easy to take other IP that's out there and adapt it to the game very easily. Whether it's a Adventure Time or Westworld. I'm not talking to any of these people yet, but just conceptually, like.
But if you're listening,
right?
Westworld would be a great one.
Yeah. It is. You have the classic fantasy world, and then you got the sci-fi world, and all. But I think the abilities are designed such that, or the roles are designed such that it should be, pretty easy to take other, stuff from other stories and adapt it in and say, what's unique about this character or the way that people function in this world, and try to distill it down into abilities and learning paths and everything. And then from there, you have a really, rules light core system that doesn't really care about the setting or the story that you're in. And you can focus really on how do we make character roles that really reflect this place.
Do you think you'll ever delve into settings? You had kind of expressed an interest in world building.
Yeah, I think I've done a lot of subtle world building in the character and treasure books. And I think if you look through those, that's one of my favorite things of pieces of feedback I'm getting. People are looking through there and are like, oh, I see a plot developing here between all of these characters. And I've really tried to, some of these characters are very specific and flavorful, and they have conflicts with other characters in the book, and they have organizations that they're part of. So there's a lot of implied world in the characters and the treasures that we've put forth, but there's no map. There's no, here are the cities everywhere, and here's the roads between them. It's, here are people and things that care about each other, and you can put them wherever you want. So I think, my part of my strategy here, ideally in the next year or two, is we're going to bring more authors on board, and I want to challenge them to look through the characters and treasures that we've made and start to build on those implied plots, and whether it's one shots or we make a campaign that ties a lot of these things together. But I want to start pulling some of that stuff out that we're setting up now to start building more adventure content.
Do you have a favorite special ability that you've created?
Ooh, that's a good question.
I think it has there's only several hundreds of them to choose from, right?
I think there's, I don't remember the exact number. I think there's 232, maybe somewhere in that region. So there's a lot, and they're all fairly unique because I tried not to make abilities that were repetitive or that overlapped. But I think my favorite one is definitely World Wish, which I think we talked about a little bit before the show. And I think that was the first ability that I created that really kind of like broke the rules for what I previously thought RPG abilities should be, because it really is its own self-contained story in one ability, and you can only use it once because it kills your own character. So you have to sacrifice your character to use this ability, and you basically turn yourself into a seed that terraforms the entire planet that you're on. And it's the kind of ability that you're only going to use if you have a really strong idea of what you want to do with your story, but it also prompts you to think of a story that it tempts you to create a story that uses that ability, right?
Well, I will say anyone that takes that ability, they definitely plan on using it, because you only get to use it once, and you've chosen that over taking something else that you could possibly use over and over again.
Yeah. But that's the kind of thing that I think, the direction that I want to continue to take Quest in. And actually, I took a lot of inspiration from Magic the Gathering, which I don't talk about often, but I think you see this with the internal scaling of some of the abilities. You could spend different amounts of points on them. But also, more broadly speaking, Quest can be infinitely complex, but I tried to make something where the complexity is linear rather than you start up here and you have to learn a ton of rules and know exactly how the game works. In a deck building game, a card game, you can, you start with a few rules, and you can start with a small deck that you understand, but then each card that you add, each card that you look at can expand the complexity of the game. You can learn kind of more incrementally if you want to. And that's something I try to do with Quest, where you can choose 6 abilities and you're set. You can play the game, but you can go out and learn all the rest of the stuff. One ability, one card at a time, make the game more complex. And that gives me, that offered me as a designer the opportunity to make abilities that really break the game or change the game dramatically, because they're not so core to the game that it's really going to affect the entire game automatically. It's completely optional and something that you can choose whenever you want. Kind of like Magic the Gathering. There's one of my favorite cards in that game is called, I believe it's called Omen Gate, and it it completely changes. It breaks all the rules of the game. It says when you play it, all right, there's no more turns. You just draw whatever cards on top of your deck, and it plays automatically. So it just changes the fundamental rules of the game in one card. And I think that kind of design is really valuable in a complicated storytelling game, because you can change how the game works in, whenever you want, without having to learn a ton of stuff. And World Wish is one of those things where it's, it's a very specific prompt that you can choose when you want it. And it's also a way, it's kind of like an escape hatch of, okay, I don't know how to end this character story. Here's a really powerful way. Here's something I can use.
Terraform a planet. That's how I do it.
Yeah.
I've played other games that have abilities similar to that, where it's like just an epic way to go out with that character and do something cool. And it is like a cool way to complete their story, especially if you can kind of like do it where you're at a key point in the campaign, right? And it makes sense narratively.
Yeah.
How much AP does that one cost? Is it free?
It is free, I think. I'm pretty sure it's free.
All your health is all
it's
you
the
need.
Ultimate cost.
Yeah.
But then I also have some treasures that are like that. I think I have one that is new in the expansion called Time's Finale, and you basically sacrifice life in exchange for 24 hours of unlimited AP. So you're at the boss battle, your character has done everything they can do, and you decide, this is the moment I'm going to go out, I'm going to do some really epic stuff, and your character dies a week later. So you have a little bit of time to wrap up loose ends, but you can't use any abilities or spend any AP after you use that pendant. So there's that's another thing, another example of what I think, the flexibility that I have in designing, when I can make a lot of this stuff optional and discoverable. It's like if you go looking for it, you can find some stuff that really changes how the game works, but you don't have to use it.
So originally, you didn't set out to create an RPG. You set out to create a show. Are we ever going to see that show?
I hope so.
Is there anything you can tease about it?
The only thing I can tease is it's a format I have not seen or heard anyone else do. So and I don't know if that's a good thing yet. I've had some people, I've told some people about it. I think it's one of those things where we'll believe it when we hear it. But it's kind of like I'm calling it tentatively, and it sounds like marketing speak, but Real Play Plus. I think it's it's designed to be real play at the table, but then there's some stuff in editing and the way we produce the show and that we want to do, where it wouldn't be, we would record things in sprints and seasons on a tight turnaround, and probably have a writer's room helping the guide in between sessions. So it'd be kind of a more intensive, maybe traditional production schedule, like kind of in film and television. But there would be actual people playing the game at the table, and all the actual play would be real, and then we would enhance it with some other tricks. So I'm hoping we can do it. It's a little bit of an expensive show to produce the way we have it envisioned and intensive, which is why we haven't done it yet. But if all goes well next year, I'm hoping we can do it. And I can disclose on this show, we're going to be starting a subscription service for Quest through Patreon by the end of the year, which will be on a monthly basis, teaming up with our official artists, Graham and Mariana, to do new characters, treasures every month. And then we're also going to start doing some new, more setting related things like locations, story prompts, and additional stuff to the core game like subclasses. So we're going to have a bunch of new classes that have maybe one or two new abilities to express the subclasses role. A lot of those will be blends of existing classes, and we'll have recommended ability paths to take there. But I think kind of we're going to show people how they can, how flexible the system is, and how you don't have to silo yourself in any one of the roles.
So I imagine if folks follow you on social media or sign up for your mailing list or on your website, which there are links in the description as always, they can stay plugged into that and know when it drops if they wanted to get involved.
Yep. Quest RPG on Twitter, and URL is pretty easy to remember: www.adventure.game.
Yeah, we got for convenience. We put the links in the description, so you can just click. Now, for the show, and you were conceptualizing this show, did you have a part in it, or did you, were you kind of like, oh, this is a show, and these are like, did you have like a cast in mind?
I don't want to be part of it. I'm like, I have some stage fright. I'm not, which is ironic that I created a performative storytelling game, but it was tough for me to actually start playing D&D. I got very into making the maps and doing the world building when it came down to having to kind of perform for friends, and
then you got Red Monster.
Characters were going to say, coming up with characters would say on the fly, all that stuff. It's nerve wracking. That's a tough job to do that. So I don't need to be part of this. I have some plot and stuff in mind, and I would be really interested in producing the show. But no, I would want a professional group of friends doing this, and then I would just enjoy it as a fan.
That sounds like friends that you like buy or rent.
Yes, I think. Yeah. Yes.
It sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun. I'm very curious to see what you come up with, and also the fact that you kind of designed this game based on wanting to do a show, and then also taking in a lot of actual plays and going, well, what rules are they actually using in their games, and which ones are they ignoring?
Yeah, and another thing that I saw when I was doing, research when I was developing Quest, and I think we talked about this before the show, but I've not played games other than D&D. I've listened to a few, so I'm not super familiar with other systems, but I am familiar with what people say about those systems, or a lot of those systems. I would read comments from players and groups online, whether it's on Reddit or other some deep forums. And one of the most popular pieces of heartburn or anxiety that I saw expressed online was from dungeon masters who were like, my players all came to the table expecting me to be Matt Mercer and provide a professional voice acting level story here with lots of deep emotion and all that. And we ended up just whacking goblins or whatever. And that was kind of like, when I was thinking about designing Quest, it's kind of something I wanted. Not a problem. It's a problem I wanted to address. I don't think it's a solvable problem. I don't think there's a magic way to
and also
have your game sound like the show.
Yeah.
But I do think there are ways that you can prompt people to do things that they might otherwise feel embarrassed or it might not occur to them to do. And I think I mentioned that earlier. One of the fighter's abilities helps your party regain more hit points during a rest if they recite some poetry at the table. And that could have just been an ability where it was like the fighter rallies everybody around camp and everybody gains 2 HP, and you didn't have to do anything other than say you were using the ability. But I wanted to create some stuff in this game that gives people permission to do things that they hear, that they like, that makes some of those experiences sound richer and more emotional and more engaging, and add that on top, mix that in with some of the rules, and subvert the kind of traditional, I just do a thing and it happens and it works and everybody's happy.
I always find it silly, like when people say that online. That I mean, because I've never seen it where someone shows up expecting Matt Mercer, and two, I'm like, well, where's my Sam Riegel, buddy?
Right.
If you can't perform like Sam Riegel or Laura Bailey, you don't deserve Matt Mercer.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, part of that is, those folks are obviously going in with the intention, and people who do real play shows, they're going in with the intention and expectation that they're creating entertainment.
Yeah.
But I think there is something compelling, when you listen to that stuff. I, I want to experience it. Like, I want to be around a table with um, people, not necessarily who are performing for an audience, because I don't want an audience. I have stage fright, as I just mentioned.
Yeah.
But I kind of want to be with people who feel invested in, being vulnerable, or having, digging a little bit deeper into the role play, and exploring their characters. And so part of my intention in designing the game was to try to give people permission to do that, or create a structure where everybody's showing up at the table. You might not know going into it that that's what you're doing. You might not go into it with the agreement of, four other people or five other people that you're going to try to perform a certain way, but then the game asks you to do it, and then maybe hopefully you see the value in doing it, or you just kind of end up doing it, and the story feels a little more special.
It's kind of a lot for a new player to get involved in a game that is more complex, and they're trying to comprehend all these new rules. They're trying to find this one number on their character sheet, and on top of that, you want them to kind of perform as well, right? Like I
Right.
said, we started a game on Sunday, and it was the first session, and one of my son's friends is running the game, and I think this is the first campaign he's tried running, and his girlfriend's in the game, and she's never really played before, and I can see she was getting a little flustered because the GM was trying to prompt like some RP scenes, and that's a lot of pressure for a new player if they're not ready for that, and sometimes we have to know to like just back off and be like, no, you like let them come along at their own pace and get more comfortable with it. And when you're
Yeah, it
juggling,
can. Yeah, it can be really scary for a lot of people to step outside of their own personal identity, and pretend to be someone else. Some people find that embarrassing, or it makes them nervous, or they don't feel creative enough, or they feel there's a lot of pressure with other
well,
people watching them do it. And
it's it's kind of weird, right?
yeah,
Like if you're not if you aren't like a theater kid or a theater person, and you're doing this for the first time, and all of a sudden you're expected to kind of like perform and act, and not any acting, right? Improv acting, which is
right,
probably like the hardest kind. uh it's kind of weird for most people, I think.
yeah. So anyway, hopefully Quest helps people, do a little bit of that. You have a couple abilities on your sheet that ask you to do things that you might not otherwise volunteer or think to do, and maybe that gets you doing more of it. We'll see.
Well, even the process of creating a character in Quest is more about what is this character like? What do they look like? Who are they? And it's very like kind of adjective driven. So
Yeah,
by the time you get to the table and you're ready to play, you've spent more time working on these things that aren't mechanically driven, but they still they're meant to like define who your character is.
yeah, yeah. And when you get to when you're finished, you just read your character sheet aloud to the table. You're not, which you can't necessarily do in other games. I have 10 Constitution, and I have 14 Intelligence,
Yeah.
and I have a grappling hook in my backpack. It's no, this is my name is this. I'm this tall, and this is how I look, and this is what it looks like when I walk into a room, and this is my hope and dream, and all of that. And I think that's that was another very intentional thing that we did to try to get people eased into the experience.
it's all, mainly it's about who your character is and what they want to do and how they look, and nothing mechanical. And
Yeah.
the only thing mechanical is your class, and then what abilities you choose from that class.
Yep.
So I think that does open up for people to kind of like experience the character, and gives them a lot less to think about as far as the gamey stuff, and also even like the equipment in the game. Like a bunch of your equipment is kind of meaningless until you give it meaning during the game.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's not a lot. I mean, the vast majority of equipment doesn't have any stats or anything attached to it. It's
Yeah.
very situational, and you kind of have some of it. You have to really be like imaginative to fit it into the game.
Well, our content director Doug was playing in a one shot, and the premise for the one shot was, oh, you live in a world that is kind of protected from the sun by these shields, and they're failing. And like he just so happened to have sunscreen on his character. He's like, well, you know what I'm doing first? I'm taking out this sunscreen and lathering it on. So I feel like it's set up for a lot of like moments like that.
Yeah, a lot of it is. I mean, a lot of it is so specific that it's very obvious what we're trying to do, and I think it's intentional. One of the things that you mentioned it. Improv acting is one of the hardest types of acting you can do. I think it also extends to the guide and the player's role in terms of figuring out, okay, what comes next, or what kind of situation can we put ourselves in. And so a lot of what I try to do with those characters and those items is to say, okay, here's a very obvious situation that you can create if you take this item or you give it to a player.
So we are just past the hour mark. Final thoughts before we head on out?
Well, this is a lot of fun. Thank you again so much for having me. I guess my final, the only thing I would say is a big thank you to everyone who's been playing. It's really been really personally rewarding. This has been the favorite, the best job I've ever had making this game, and I get to work with a lot of really talented, creative people, and so just a thank you to everyone who has been playing Quest the past few years for making that all possible, and I'm excited to show you all what's coming next.
Well, thanks for coming on. As always, folks, down in the description you can find links to follow Quest RPG on the interwebs. Please do so, and until next time, stay nerdy.